I'm Stephanie Chen, 27, female. I work as a freelance graphic designer and illustrator from my cozy apartment, a life I built for myself through late nights and endless creativity. For the most part, my life was quiet, centered around my work, my close-knit family, and my loving parents. I thought I knew my family inside and out, but I was about to discover that one of them was a complete stranger, a monster hiding behind the perfect smile everyone adored. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in my parents' house was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey. Christmas was always a big deal in our family, a loud, cheerful affair orchestrated by my mom, Helen. At 54, she was a retired nurse with a talent for making everyone feel at home, and her energy was the glue that held our chaotic gatherings together. My dad, a man of few words but deep affection, was tending to the fireplace, his quiet presence a comforting anchor. My older brother, David, was there with his wife, Jessica. To say Jessica was the family favorite would be an understatement. At 30, she was a polished social media manager who radiated confidence and charm. She had a story for every occasion, a compliment for every person, and a smile that could disarm a battalion. David, a 29-year-old financial advisor, was utterly smitten with her, and my parents treated her like the daughter they'd always wanted. She was organized, thoughtful, and remembered every birthday and anniversary. Compared to her, I often felt like a slightly awkward, paint-splattered accessory. My work was online and solitary, and I was quieter by nature, preferring observation to participation. Stephanie, honey, your latest illustrations for that children's book were just breathtaking, Jessica said, her voice cutting through the chatter as she handed me a glass of sparkling cider. David and I were saying you're just too talented for your own good. Thanks, Jessica, I murmured, accepting the glass. It was a typical Jessica move, a public compliment that made you feel good but also subtly reminded everyone of her supportive, gracious nature. Our cousin Ben, an IT specialist who was more like a second brother to me, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, knowing smile. At 28, Ben was the only one who seemed to see the world with the same level of cynical observation as I did. He didn't dislike Jessica, but he wasn't mesmerized by her performance either. The dinner was perfect. The food was incredible, the conversation flowed, and laughter echoed off the walls. My dad gave his traditional, heartfelt toast, his eyes glistening as he looked around the table at his family. To health, happiness, and being together, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We all raised our glasses. Jessica had brought her famous home-made pecan pie for dessert. I know it's your favorite, Helen, she announced, placing it on the table with a flourish. My mom beamed, touched by the gesture. As the evening wore on, a sense of deep contentment settled over me. Despite my occasional feelings of being the odd one out, I loved my family. I loved the traditions, the familiar jokes, the warmth of the house. Everything felt safe, secure, and unchanging. David and Jessica were talking about buying a bigger house. My parents were planning a trip for their anniversary, and I had just landed a major new client. Life was good. Looking at Jessica as she laughed at one of my dad's terrible jokes, I felt a pang of guilt for my quiet reservations about her. She made my brother happy, and she went out of her way to make my parents feel loved. She was, for all intents and purposes, the perfect daughter-in-law. She fit into our family puzzle so seamlessly, filling a space we didn't even know was empty. I made a silent promise to myself to try harder, to push past my introverted nature and embrace her as the sister she was trying to be. After all, she was family. After the main course was cleared, the anticipation for dessert was palpable. Jessica's pecan pie sat on the counter, a golden, brown masterpiece. She insisted on serving everyone herself, cutting precise, elegant slices and placing them on my mother's best china plates. She made a point of giving me the first piece, for my talented sister-in-law. She said with a dazzling smile, setting the plate in front of me, I made sure to get you a slice with the most pecans. I smiled back, genuinely touched. It looks amazing, Jessica, thank you. The pie was still warm, and the aroma of toasted nuts and caramel filled the air. I picked up my fork, the tines scraping lightly against the plate. The rest of the family was still chatting, the sounds of their conversation a pleasant hum in the background. My dad was telling a long, rambling story about a fishing trip, and David was laughing, his arm draped lovingly around Jessica's shoulders. My mom was watching me, a soft, maternal smile on her face. It was a perfect holiday moment, a snapshot I would have framed if I could. I angled my fork to get the perfect bite, a bit of the flaky crust, some of the gooey filling, and a crunchy pecan on top. I lifted the fork, the delicious morsel just inches from my lips. I could almost taste the sweetness, the rich, buttery flavor I'd been looking forward to all evening. Don't do it. The scream ripped through the festive atmosphere, sharp and terrified. It was my mother. I froze, my fork hovering in midair. I turned to look at her. All the color had drained from her face. Her eyes were wide with a horror I had never seen before, and they were locked on my plate. Her hand was outstretched towards me, trembling. "Mom," David asked, his voice filled with concern. "What's wrong?" But she didn't answer. Her mouth opened as if to say more, but only a choked gasp came out. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed, slumping sideways in her chair before sliding to the floor in a heap. Chaos erupted. My dad yelled her name, rushing to her side. David was on his feet instantly, shouting, "Someone call 911." Jessica let out a theatrical shriek, her hands flying to her mouth. Ben was already on his phone, his voice steady and calm as he relayed our address to the operator. I was paralyzed for a second, the entire world narrowing to the fork in my hand and my mother's crumpled form on the floor. Her scream echoed in my ears, "Don't do it." What did she mean? What had she seen? My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I dropped the fork, which clattered loudly onto the plate, the sound unnaturally sharp in the sudden pandemonium. My dad, using his old first aid knowledge, was checking my mom's pulse and breathing. "She's breathing, but her pulse is faint," he said, his voice strained. "Helen, Helen, can you hear me?" I scrambled to her side, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Why had she screamed at me? Why had she fainted? It made no sense. One moment, we were a happy family enjoying Christmas dessert, and the next, my mother was unconscious on the floor, and her terrified warning was branded into my brain. The paramedics arrived with astonishing speed, their presence filling the house with a clinical urgency that felt alien in the warm, festive setting. They were professional and efficient, asking questions I couldn't answer, performing checks, and carefully loading my mom onto a stretcher. Only one family member in the ambulance, one of them said. My dad immediately stepped forward. "I'll go." He turned to us, his face pale and drawn. "David, you and Stephanie follow in your car. Jessica, can you stay with Ben and clean up?" Jessica nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "Of course. Oh, this is just awful. Poor Helen." As we rushed to follow the ambulance, my gaze fell back on the dining table. It was a scene of abrupt abandonment, half-eaten desserts, discarded napkins, and my plate, sitting there with its single, uneaten piece of pie. The fork lay beside it, exactly where I had dropped it. My mother's scream replayed in my head. "Don't do it." It wasn't a warning about the pie, was it? That was insane. But looking at that slice of pie, I felt a chilling premonition that my world had just been fractured, and I had no idea how to piece it back together. The hospital was a sterile, white world away from the warmth of our Christmas celebration. The scent of antiseptic cleaner replaced the smell of pine and turkey. David and I sat in the waiting room, the silence between us heavy and anxious. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, while I sat rigidly, my mind replaying the scene over and over. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor came out to speak with us. "She's stable," he said, his voice calm. It seems she had a vasovagal syncope episode, likely triggered by extreme emotional distress or shock. We're keeping her for observation, but all her vitals are returning to normal. You can see her now. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. My dad was already in the room, holding my mom's hand. She looked small and frail against the stark white hospital sheets, but her eyes were open and alert. When she saw me, her expression tightened, a flicker of the same fear I'd seen at the dinner table. "Oh, Stephanie," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Mom, you scared us half to death." David said, rushing to her other side. "What happened?" The doctor said it was shock. Jessica arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small bag with my mom's essentials. She was the image of concern, fussing over my mom's blanket and offering her water. "Helen, we were all so worried. Is there anything at all I can get for you?" My mom's eyes darted from Jessica to me, and she gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She squeezed my hand tightly. "I'm just tired," she said, her voice weak. Maybe just Stephanie could stay for a little while. I don't want to overwhelm myself." It was a gentle dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. David and Jessica looked surprised, but they complied. Of course, Mom. We'll be right outside, David said, kissing her forehead. Jessica leaned down. Rest well, Helen. We love you. As soon as they left the room, pulling the door partially closed, my mom's demeanor changed. The frailty was replaced by a raw, urgent fear. She gripped my hand, her knuckles white. Stephanie, listen to me. You have to listen to me very carefully. Mom, what is it? What happened? Her eyes filled with tears. It was the pie, your slice of pie. I stared at her, completely bewildered. The pie, what are you talking about? When Jessica was serving you, she turned her back to the counter for just a second. I thought she was just getting a better grip on the plate, but I saw her do something. She had her hand cupped, and she sprinkled something over your slice. It was small, like dust or powder. My blood ran cold. What, Mom? That's crazy. It was probably just sugar or cinnamon. No, she insisted, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. It wasn't. It was gritty, like crushed nuts. Stephanie, you know your allergy. You know how severe it is. I felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. I have a severe, life-threatening allergy to all tree nuts. It wasn't just a minor intolerance. Ingestion could send me into anaphylactic shock within minutes. My entire family knew this. We were painstakingly careful. Jessica, who had been in our family for 5 years, knew it better than anyone. She'd seen me have a mild reaction once after cross-contamination at a restaurant and had been the one to drive me to the ER. She knows. I whispered, the words barely audible. She knows what would happen. I didn't know what to do. My mom sobbed, tears streaming down her face. My mind went blank. All I could see was you lifting that fork to your mouth. I couldn't think of the words, I just screamed, and then the thought of what could have happened. I just blacked out. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her scream, her look of sheer terror, it wasn't for her own health, it was for my life. Someone at our Christmas dinner table, my brother's wife, the woman my parents adored, had tried to poison me. The perfect family Christmas was a lie. The whole evening, her compliments, her smiles, her special piece of pie, it was all a facade, hiding something monstrously evil. But why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would she do that? My mom shook her head, her face a mask of grief and confusion. I don't know, honey, I don't know, but we can't tell your brother, not yet. He wouldn't believe it. He adores her. He would say I was mistaken, that I was confused. She was right. David saw Jessica as flawless. Accusing her of attempted murder based on my mom's panicked observation would tear our family apart. He would defend his wife, and we would look like we were crazy or malicious. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach, extinguishing the fear. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated attack. Jessica had tried to kill me, and she had done it in the most public, yet secretive, way possible, right under our family's noses. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice steady now. Don't worry, we're not going to accuse her, we're going to prove it. My mom looked at me, her tear-filled eyes searching my face. She saw the determination there and nodded slowly, squeezing my hand one last time. In that sterile hospital room, a silent pact was formed. The hunt for the truth had just begun. The days after Christmas were a blur of forced normalcy. Mom was discharged from the hospital the next day, the official story being that she'd had a panic attack due to holiday stress. Jessica was relentlessly attentive, calling my mom twice a day and offering to bring over meals. Each time she called, my mom would put the phone on speaker, and we'd exchange horrified looks as Jessica poured on the sweet, concerned act. It was chilling. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone logical, someone trustworthy, and someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss our story as a grief-induced fantasy. I needed Ben. I called him and asked him to meet me at a coffee shop far from our usual neighborhoods. I laid out the whole story, from what my mom saw to the severity of my allergy. He listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he didn't tell me I was crazy. He just took a slow sip of his coffee and said, okay, so we need motive and we need proof. Exactly. I said, relief flooding through me. She's the perfect sister-in-law. She has no reason to hate me. We get along fine. It makes no sense. Crime rarely makes sense on the surface. Ben said, already shifting into ID problem-solving mode. People do desperate things for 3 main reasons: love, power, or money. I doubt it's love or power, so let's start with money. That's when a thought struck me. A few weeks before Christmas, my parents, who were not very tech-savvy, had asked for my help setting up their online banking and managing some of their bills. They were planning their retirement and wanted to get a clearer picture of their finances. I had spent a weekend with them, sorting through accounts, creating budgets, and showing them how to track their spending. My parents, I said, showing them how to track their spending. My parents, I said slowly, I've been helping them organize their finances. Could that be related? Ben's eyes lit up. That's a thread, a strong one, who was helping them before. No one really, I think. I think Jessica offered a few times. She works with online branding and finances for her clients, so she probably knows her way around. But my dad is old-fashioned and always handled it himself. Let's dig. Ben said, that evening, I went to my parents' house. My dad was out, and my mom gave me a stack of their recent bank statements. She said Jessica had helped her set up automatic payments for a few utilities a couple of months back, using her laptop. It was a seemingly innocent act of kindness. While my mom kept watch, I logged into their online accounts. At first, everything looked normal: mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery expenses. I sent screenshots to Ben, and we talked over a secure chat. He told me what to look for: small, recurring payments to unfamiliar companies, or transfers that looked slightly out of place, and then we found it: a monthly payment of $300, labeled simply as creative consulting, going to an account I didn't recognize. It had been happening for over a year. Then another one, a recurring software subscription, for $150 a month. Ben did a quick search on the receiving account numbers. The creative consulting payments were going to a shell company. After an hour of deep diving into business registration records, Ben found the owner. The company was registered to an J. Miller. Jessica's maiden name was Miller. The software subscription was for a high-end social media management tool, the exact kind a professional in her field would use for her own business, not the kind my retired parents would ever need. She had been systematically siphoning money from them for at least a year, maybe longer. The total was already over $5,000. It was death by 1,000 cuts, small amounts they would never notice. My recent involvement in their finances must have terrified her. I would have found it eventually. I was a direct threat to her secret income stream. This is the motive. I typed to Ben, my hands shaking with rage. She wasn't trying to get rid of me because she hated me. She was trying to get rid of a witness. Ben's reply came a moment later. This is good stuff, but it's circumstantial. Her trying to poison you is a huge leap from financial fraud. We need something more concrete. He asked me if Jessica had ever used the family's home computer. My mom confirmed she had many times. Ben told me to bring him the old desktop computer from my dad's study. The next day, I dropped it off at his apartment. What he did next was pure tech magic. He ran recovery software on the hard drive, looking for deleted files, browser histories, anything. 2 days later, he called me. I've got it. He said, his voice grim. You need to see this. I went back to his place. On his screen was a list of recovered internet search queries from the week before Christmas, all made from my parents' IP address. The searches were chilling. How to extract pure walnut oil at home, odorless poison for humans, symptoms of severe anaphylactic shock, how much nut exposure causes death, can police trace powdered nuts in food? And the final damning piece of evidence, a deleted email receipt from an online specialty food store. The purchase was for a small, highly concentrated bottle of walnut oil extract, delivered to a P.O. Box 2 towns over just 3 days before Christmas. I stared at the screen, feeling sick to my stomach. This was undeniable proof. She had researched it. She had planned it. She had bought the weapon. This was premeditated, cold-blooded, attempted murder. The image of her smiling, handing me that piece of pie, flashed in my mind. The charming, perfect woman was a mask, and underneath it was a monster who was willing to kill me to cover up her petty theft. The rage I felt was so pure and so cold it felt like ice in my veins. She wasn't just going to be exposed. She was going to be destroyed. We had the proof, but my mom's initial fear was still valid. If we went to the police or confronted David now, Jessica could spin a web of lies. She could claim the searches were for a client's project. She could say the walnut oil was for a homemade beauty product. She could paint my mom as a confused old woman and me as a jealous sister-in-law. Her entire persona was built on being believable. To bring her down, we needed to shatter that persona completely. We needed her to expose herself. That's when the idea for the New Year's Eve party began to form. It was a family tradition to gather at my parents' house to ring in the new year. It was the perfect stage. Ben, my mom, and I became a secret council of war, planning every detail in hushed tones when my dad was out of the house. We decided not to tell him or David anything until we had an airtight confession. It was too risky. The first step was setting the stage. Ben purchased several high-quality spy cameras, the kind that look like phone chargers and smoke detectors. A few days before the party, he went over to my parents' house under the guise of upgrading their Wi-Fi network. He strategically placed the cameras in the living room, the dining room, and most importantly, my dad's study, a place where private conversations often happened. He linked them all to a secure server he could monitor from his laptop. The second step was the bait. Jessica's motive was greed. We would use that greed to corner her. The plan was for me to announce a new business venture during the party. I would tell everyone that I had been developing a unique design software for independent artists and had just received interest from a potential investor. The investor, I would explain, was willing to put up a significant amount of money, but only if I could show that I had some family backing as well. This story was plausible. I was a designer, and it was the kind of project I might actually undertake. I would announce that I was looking for a small, initial investment from the family to secure the larger deal. The key part of the trap would be my next statement, that as a condition of the investment, the outside firm required a full, independent financial audit of anyone contributing to ensure all funds were legitimate. This would put Jessica in an impossible position. She couldn't let David invest his money because an audit would expose her theft from my parents, but the lure of a potentially massive return on investment from my successful, new company would be too tempting for her to ignore. She would be trapped between her greed and her fear. The final part of the plan was the confrontation. I would pull Jessica aside into the study to privately ask for her advice on the investment. I would then slowly reveal pieces of the evidence we had, not as accusations, but as concerns. I would tell her I'd noticed some odd payments from my parents' accounts and was worried they were being scammed. I would show her the search history, framing it as a concern that someone had been using their computer for something sinister. My goal was to make her panic, to make her think her schemes were unraveling, and in her arrogance, try to manipulate her way out of it, hopefully admitting everything in the process. While this confrontation was happening in the study, Ben would be in another room with my parents and David, watching a live feed from the hidden cameras. They would see and hear everything. Preparing for that night was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had to rehearse my lines, control my emotions, and prepare to face the woman who tried to murder me. The anger was a constant fire in my gut, but I knew I had to be calm, convincing, and in control. I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was an actress, and this was the performance of a lifetime. The stage was set for New Year's Eve. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of Jessica's elaborate deception. New Year's Eve arrived, cold and clear. Our family gathered, a smaller group this time. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that only my mom, Ben, and I understood. Jessica was in her element, sparkling in a sequined dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. She greeted me with a warm hug that made my skin crawl. "Stephanie, Happy New Year. I have a feeling this is going to be your year," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Oh, you have no idea," I thought to myself. We made it through dinner, the small talk feeling like a Herculean effort. Finally, as people were finishing their dessert, I store-bought cake at my mom's insistence. I cleared my throat and stood up. "I have some exciting news I'd like to share with you all." I began, my heart pounding. I laid out the story of my new business venture, the design software, the interested investor. I watched Jessica's face. Her eyes lit up with a familiar, predatory gleam at the mention of money. David looked proud, clapping me on the back. "That's amazing, Steph," he said. "Of course we'll invest, right, Jess?" Jessica's smile was wide, but I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes when I delivered the next line. "The only thing is, the investors are very strict. They require a full financial audit for all initial backers to ensure everything is above board." Just as I predicted, Jessica's expression froze. "An audit? Well, that seems a bit invasive, doesn't it?" she said, forcing a light laugh. "Are you sure that's necessary for family?" "It's non-negotiable," I said firmly. I then turned to her. "Actually, Jessica, with your business background, could I steal you for a few minutes? I'd love to get your advice on this in private." She couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. We walked into my dad's study, the designated stage for our final act. I closed the door behind us. In the living room, Ben was making an excuse to show David and my parents a funny video on his laptop, which was, in reality, the live feed from the camera in the room. "So, what's this really about, Stephanie?" Jessica asked, her tone shifting now that we were alone. "I'm worried, Jessica," I said, my voice filled with fake concern. While I was looking over Mom and Dad's accounts for this investment, I found some strange payments to a company called Creative Consulting. "I'm worried they're being scammed." Her face paled. "I'm sure it's nothing. Old people get confused with their finances all the time." I also had Ben check their computer just to be safe. I continued, watching her carefully, and he found the weirdest search history, things about poisons, nut allergies, anaphylactic shock. "It's terrifying. It looks like someone was planning to hurt me. I had her." Her mask of composure shattered. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" She hissed, her voice a low snarl that I'd never heard before. The charming socialite was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "I don't know what to think," I said, feigning innocence. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Your parents' money was just sitting there, wasted. I put it to good use, and you and your snooping were going to ruin everything. That Christmas pie was supposed to be a solution. A simple hospital visit, maybe worse, to keep you out of my business. It would have been a tragic accident, an unfortunate allergic reaction." Every word was a confession, delivered with pure, venomous spite. She took a step closer, her face contorted with rage. "But you just had to survive, didn't you? And your mother just had to faint. You're like a cockroach." At that moment, the study door swung open. David stood there, his face ashen. Behind him were my parents. Their expressions were a mixture of horror, disbelief, and heartbreak. Jessica froze, her mouth agape, as she realized they had heard every single word. The live feed had worked perfectly. David's voice was barely a whisper. "Jess, what did you say?" The color drained from her face as she looked from him to me, finally understanding the depth of the trap she had walked into. The performance was over. The truth was out. And the silence in that room was more damning than any accusation I could have ever made. The aftermath was a quiet, devastating storm. Jessica didn't scream or fight. She just crumpled, her arrogance dissolving into pathetic, hollow sobs as the reality of her situation crashed down on her. David, my strong, confident brother, looked completely broken. He stared at the woman he loved as if she were a ghost, his eyes reflecting a pain so deep I wasn't sure it would ever heal. My dad, a man I had rarely seen angry, was the one who acted. His face was set like stone as he calmly picked up the phone and dialed the police. He relayed the situation in a low, steady voice, his words precise and final. "I'd like to report a theft," he said, pausing before adding, "and an attempted murder." The police arrived quickly. We gave them our statements and handed over a copy of Ben's video file containing Jessica's full confession, along with all the evidence of the financial fraud and the internet history. They led Jessica away in handcuffs. She didn't look at any of us as she left, her face buried in her hands. The sight of her being put into a police car outside our family home on New Year's Eve is an image that will be forever burned into my memory. The weeks and months that followed were difficult. David filed for divorce immediately. He moved back in with my parents for a while, a shadow of his former self. He was wrestling with an immense sense of betrayal and guilt for not seeing what was right in front of him. We talked for hours, and for the first time, I felt like I truly had my brother back. The superficial barrier that Jessica had built between us was gone, and what was left was a raw, honest connection. The legal process was draining, but with the evidence we had, the outcome was never in doubt. Jessica pleaded guilty to multiple charges of fraud and assault in exchange for a lesser sentence. She was sentenced to several years in prison. We never heard from her again, and we never wanted to. Our family changed after that night. The perfect facade was gone, and in its place was something more real and far stronger. My dad became more open with his emotions. My mom learned to trust her instincts again, and David slowly began to heal. He eventually moved into his own place and started to rebuild his life, one day at a time. Our relationship and his relationship with our parents became deeper and more honest than ever before. For me, the experience was transformative. It taught me that strength isn't always loud and that sometimes the quietest people see the most. My work flourished as I poured my complex emotions into my art. My new business venture even became a real project after the fake announcement sparked some genuine ideas. Our family gatherings are different now. They are smaller, quieter, and more genuine. The laughter is softer, but the love is louder. We survived a poison that was far more insidious than crushed nuts in a pie. We survived the poison of deceit. We were broken, but we pieced ourselves back together, stronger and wiser. The scars remain, a reminder of the monster we unknowingly welcomed into our home. But they also remind us that we, as a family, survived her. And that is a story worth telling.